For 12 years, Sarah lived like a shadow. The woman who had once slipped from helicopters into hostile deserts, who had led men twice her size through blistering firefights, had learned the art of being invisible. In a quiet coastal town in the United States, she reinvented herself. To strangers, she was no more than a fitness trainer with sharp discipline, a woman who ran a small studio that taught self-defense to kids and endurance training to weekend warriors. Her neighbors admired her stamina, her way of cutting through excuses, her sharp eyes that seemed to see through bluffs. But no one truly knew her. Not her friends from the farmer's market. Not the mothers who brought their daughters to her martial arts classes. Not even the children she coached, who adored her calm but unyielding guidance. To them, she was simply Sarah, a woman with a mysterious past she never spoke about. The truth, though, was that Sarah carried a history few could imagine. She had once been part of the Navy's most elite brotherhood, an outsider who had fought her way into the impossible. She had earned a trident, the sacred emblem of the Navy SEALs. She had deployed across the globe, faced enemies that never made the news, endured losses that haunted her every night. And then, one day, she walked away. The reasons were locked deep inside her, spoken to no one. But when she left the SEALs, she didn't just leave the military, she erased herself. In town, Sarah's studio was her sanctuary. Early mornings began with her pulling up the heavy metal shutters, the scent of chalk and rubber mats filling the air. The place wasn't fancy, just sandbags, climbing ropes, and free weights stacked neatly against the walls. Yet it drew in the kind of people Sarah respected, not the ones who wanted shortcuts, but those willing to sweat, to fail, to rise again. Her students adored her, even if they feared her at times. She had a gift for teaching, though it was laced with a steel edge. When a teenage boy whined about push-ups, she didn't raise her voice. She simply stood in front of him, arms folded, gaze steady. "The wall won't care about your excuses," she'd say. "Neither will life." And somehow, the boy would keep going. Still, there were signs. People noticed she carried herself differently. She walked like someone always scanning exits, like someone who had been conditioned never to let her guard down. Even in laughter, her eyes were alert, calculating. The townspeople chalked it up to military discipline and left it at that. They didn't pry. At night, though, Sarah's facade cracked. She would lie awake in the dark, the sound of waves faint through her window. Her hands sometimes trembled, gripping the sheets like a rope dangling from a helicopter skid. In her dreams, she saw sand kicking up from rotor blades, muzzle flashes in the distance, teammates shouting over radio static. She woke in silence, sweat soaking her shirt, forcing herself to breathe. The medals she had once been awarded, the Bronze Stars, the ribbons for valor, the commendations whispered in secret rooms, or locked in a small box beneath her bed. She never looked at them. She had thought about throwing them into the ocean, but something inside her couldn't. They were ghosts, reminders of the life she had abandoned. To the outside world, Sarah was a success story, a disciplined veteran who had found peace in civilian life. But she felt like a fraud. Every run along the beach, every smile exchanged with neighbors, felt borrowed. She lived quietly, but beneath the surface, she was still the woman forged by fire, the operator who had been trained never to forget. There were times when that past nearly slipped out. Once, at a 4th of July picnic, a firework whistled too close, and Sarah's body reacted before her mind caught up. She dropped flat to the grass, eyes darting for threats, while others around her laughed in delight at the sparkling sky. She forced a smile, brushing off her reaction. "Old habits," she said, but no one pressed her. Another time, a drunk man at a bar made the mistake of grabbing her wrist. Sarah moved without thinking, twisting his arm into a lock that sent him sprawling before she realized how much force she had used. She let him go immediately, murmured an apology, and walked out into the night air. Her heart raced, not from fear of him, but from fear of herself. For 12 years, Sarah lived like this, half present, half elsewhere. She buried her sealed past so deeply that sometimes even she wondered if it had really happened. Could she truly have been that woman? The one who fought in deserts and jungles, who held the lives of teammates in her steady hands. Or was that just a dream she had once woken from, leaving behind only scars? Still, no matter how hard she tried to hide it, the past always found small ways to remind her it was real. The ache in her knees from parachute landings, the notch in her collarbone from shrapnel, the faint ringing in her ears from years of explosions. She carried her history in silence, a body that told stories she refused to speak aloud. Most nights, Sarah stood on her porch, watching the horizon darken over the ocean. The waves rolled endlessly, steady and unforgiving, much like the life she had once known. Out there, past the horizon, were places where her name had been whispered over radios, where she had bled and fought and survived. But here, in this quiet American town, she was just another face in the crowd. She told herself this was all she wanted: to be forgotten, to be ordinary, to be free of the burden of being someone. But Sarah knew, in the deepest part of her soul, that you could never truly walk away from the teams, because the SEALs never left you. And sooner or later, the past always came calling. Sarah had always believed that silence was its own kind of freedom. After years of living in war zones where every sound meant danger, she found strange comfort in the rhythms of small-town life. The mornings started with the smell of salt from the ocean and the faint sound of fishing boats heading out before dawn. She would jog the empty boardwalk before anyone else stirred, her footsteps quick and steady, her breathing controlled. For her, routine wasn't habit, it was survival, the anchor that kept her balanced in a world that felt unfamiliar. The town had grown used to her presence. She was Coach Sarah, the woman who owned Iron Tide Fitness, a modest but relentless gym tucked between a surf shop and a bakery. The studio was her battlefield now. Inside, there were no glossy mirrors or padded comforts, only ropes, kettlebells, battered mats, and a climbing wall patched from years of use. People didn't come here for luxury. They came because they wanted results. And Sarah gave them that, whether they liked her methods or not. She had a reputation for being firm, sometimes unyielding, but never cruel. When a client complained about the pace of her workouts, she would stare with that unnerving calm, the kind that made excuses shrivel in the air. "You want change?" she'd ask. Then earn it, and somehow no one walked out on her. They pushed harder, sweated more, and left feeling like they had glimpsed a piece of themselves they never thought possible. Her favorite classes weren't the adults who wanted to drop pounds or tone muscles. They were the kids. She started an after-school program teaching martial arts and self-defense. The children adored her. Some called her Coach S, others simply Sarah, but all looked at her as if she carried a secret strength. She never spoke of her past, but it was there in the way she taught them. Balance first, she'd tell a girl wobbling on a mat. Strength without balance is weakness. Eyes up, she'd remind a boy sparring too cautiously. If you only look down, you'll miss the strike coming for you. The lessons were simple, but layered with meaning forged from years of survival. Parents thanked her for giving their children confidence, for teaching them courage without arrogance. None of them knew that she was quietly passing down fragments of SEAL training, reshaped into lessons a 10-year-old could grasp. But even as she thrived in this new role, Sarah wrestled with the shadows that trailed her. Nights were the hardest. Sleep never came easily, and when it did, it brought memories that left her gasping awake. She saw the faces of men she'd served with, the heat of foreign deserts, the roar of gunfire, the blood that soaked into sand. She kept a small bottle of whiskey in her kitchen cabinet, not for company, but for those nights when the memories were too heavy to bear. She never drank much, just enough to dull the edge. The people around her noticed she carried something unspoken. A local fisherman once told her, "You've got the eyes of someone who's seen storms." She only smiled, replying softly, "Haven't we all?" She was careful, though. Careful never to reveal the truth. She avoided veterans groups, never attended parades, and politely declined whenever someone asked if she'd served. She wasn't ashamed, far from it. But she feared what would happen if the world she had built collided with the one she had left behind. She wanted the children in her gym to see her as strong, steady Sarah, not as a soldier defined by blood and scars. Still, glimpses of her past slipped through cracks she couldn't always seal. One afternoon, a teenage boy asked how she knew so much about survival techniques. She had been showing the class how to create a makeshift splint with nothing but a t-shirt and 2 sticks. The boy tilted his head curiously. "Did you, go camping a lot or something?" Sarah hesitated, then answered, "Something like that." The truth itched on her tongue, but she swallowed it. How could she explain to a room of kids that she had once bandaged wounds under enemy fire, that she had used the same t-shirt trick to keep a teammate alive until extraction? No, that wasn't their burden. Her job was to give them strength, not her ghosts. Despite her walls, the town slowly wove her into its fabric. She became part of their lives in ways she hadn't expected. When the bakery owner's wife fell ill, Sarah delivered groceries and checked in on them every week. When the high school's wrestling team lost their coach, she stepped in temporarily, teaching boys twice her size that discipline mattered more than muscle. She didn't seek attention, but it found her anyway. For the first time in years, Sarah felt something resembling peace. She still bore her scars, but she learned to live among people who knew her only as who she was now, not who she had been. And in many ways, that anonymity was her salvation. She had shed the weight of expectations, of the endless cycle of missions and orders, of being part of something that demanded everything and gave nothing back but memories. Yet peace, she discovered, came with its own strange unease. There were moments, quiet moments, when she felt restless, like her body remembered a different rhythm. She would stand on the shore, staring at the horizon, and her chest would ache with the urge to move, to fight, to do. It was as if her very bones carried the pulse of action, refusing to fully settle into civilian stillness. Sarah tried to channel it into her work. She pushed herself in training, running farther, lifting heavier, climbing ropes until her hands blistered. She wasn't competing with anyone, she was competing with herself, with a ghost of the woman she used to be. But no matter how far she ran, the ghost always matched her stride. Then came the community's annual marathon. Neighbors encouraged her to join, though she usually avoided public events. Reluctantly, she signed up, thinking it might blend her into the crowd. On race day, she stood among hundreds of eager runners, wearing a plain cap pulled low over her eyes. When the starting horn blared, she surged forward with the pack. But within minutes, Sarah's instincts betrayed her. She fell into a tactical pace, regulating her breathing, scanning the field, assessing competitors. Halfway through, she realized she was pulling ahead, her body moving with the precision of years of conditioning. By the finish line, she was so far ahead, the crowd erupted in surprise. Reporters snapped photos. Children cheered her name. She had wanted invisibility, but instead, she had won. That night, staring at the medal lay draped over her neck, Sarah felt uneasy. She had tried to bury her past, but it leaked through her in everything she did. She couldn't escape it, not really. 12 years had passed since she'd left the Navy. 12 years of building a life made of quiet routines, of hiding her scars behind sweat and smiles. To her neighbors, She was a coach, a mentor, a strong woman who gave back to her community. But Sarah knew the truth. Her peace was only temporary. The life she had built was sturdy but fragile, balanced on the thin hope that the Navy, the past, the ghosts of her service would never come knocking. What she didn't know was that they were already on their way. It began on an ordinary autumn evening. The sky was painted in bruised shades of orange and purple, and Sarah had just locked the doors of her studio. The air carried the bite of sea salt, and for once she felt content. She slung her gym bag over her shoulder and started toward her truck parked down the street. That was when she noticed it, a plain white envelope tucked under her windshield wiper. She frowned. No one left notes for her. The townspeople weren't the kind to play games. Pulling it free, she turned it over. No return address, no name. Only one word written in block letters across the front. Her call sign. Sarah froze. The world seemed to contract around her, her chest tightening. That name belonged to another life, one she had buried so deep it shouldn't have surfaced here. Not now. Only a handful of people knew it. All of them were part of the teams. All of them belonged to a world she had left behind. Her instinct was immediate and primal: scan, assess, control. Her eyes darted across the street. Nothing unusual. Just a couple walking their dog, a truck rumbling by, the neon glow of the diner sign flickering. But her pulse drummed against her throat. Whoever had left this knew exactly where to find her. She got into her truck, locked the doors, and tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. She unfolded it with steady hands, though her breath betrayed her calm. The message was short, typed in stark black letters. We need to talk. Soon. No signature. No instructions. Just that. Her gut twisted. She had seen this kind of message before, in the days when missions were passed quietly, when operations existed only in whispers. But this wasn't supposed to happen anymore. She was out. She was a civilian. She had made that choice. Sarah crumpled the paper and shoved it into her pocket. By the time she drove home, the sun had vanished, and the coastal fog had rolled in thick as smoke. She pulled into her driveway, scanning the tree line automatically, every shadow looking like it might move. She cursed herself for it. Paranoid, she muttered under her breath. But deep down, she knew better. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table with a glass of water, the folded note lying in front of her like a living thing. Memories stirred. The last time she had heard her call sign was over the radio, during a mission that had gone to hell in a place that didn't officially exist. She could still hear the frantic shouts of her teammates, the bursts of gunfire tearing through the night, the deafening thud of mortar. She could still smell the iron tang of blood and dust. They had lost someone that night, someone whose absence still ached like a missing limb. She had promised herself that after that mission, she was done. Done with death, done with secrets, done with carrying the weight of men she couldn't save. She had vanished, walked away, and built her new life stone by stone. And yet here it was, breaking through her walls like it had never left. At 2 a.m, she stood abruptly, snatched the note off the table, and carried it to the sink. She lit a match and held it under the paper until the flame caught, curling the edges into black ash. She dropped it into the sink, watching it burn down to nothing. There, she whispered. It's gone. But the unease didn't vanish with it. The note may have been destroyed, but the message was already seared into her mind. In the days that followed, she began to notice things she couldn't ignore. A black SUV, parked down the street 2 mornings in a row, engine idling, no one stepping out. Strangers in the grocery store who lingered near the end of her aisle, watching her too closely. Footsteps behind her on her evening jogs that vanished when she turned around. It could have been coincidence. It could have been paranoia. But Sarah trusted her instincts more than coincidence. And her instincts told her she was being watched. At the gym, she pushed her students harder, masking her unease behind drills and routines. Parents noticed her distraction, but she brushed it off as fatigue. Inside, though, her body hummed with tension, her old training awakening without permission. Her senses sharpened. Every sound, every shadow, every unfamiliar face triggered alarms she couldn't silence. One night, as she locked up the studio, she caught sight of something that stopped her cold. A man in a dark jacket stood across the street, leaning against a lamppost. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't on his phone. He was just waiting. His eyes locked on hers when she turned. Sarah's breath slowed. She kept her movements calm, but inside, adrenaline surged. She slid her gym bag strap higher onto her shoulder and walked to her truck, refusing to hurry. The man didn't move. He just watched as she climbed in and drove away. She circled the block twice before heading home, her heart pounding. Whoever he was, he hadn't followed. But the message was clear. Her past had found her. Back at her house, Sarah pulled the blinds shut and sat in the dark, gripping the edge of the table. She had thought she could bury her history under years of silence. She had thought if she built a new life carefully enough, no one would ever come looking. She was wrong. The ghosts weren't just memories anymore. They were here, standing in her streets, sliding notes under her windshield, waiting outside her studio. Sarah exhaled slowly, her jaw tight. She had two choices: keep running, or face whatever was coming. But in her gut, she already knew the truth. No one ever really leaves the teens. The knock came at midnight. Sarah had been awake anyway, pacing the length of her living room in bare feet, the glow of a single lamp casting long shadows across the walls. She had stopped sleeping well since the envelope appeared, her instincts humming like a live wire. She froze at the sound. 3 sharp raps measured, deliberate. Not the knock of a neighbor. Not the clumsy pounding of someone drunk. She went still, listening. Her hand drifted unconsciously to the drawer by the entryway, where a pistol lay hidden beneath old mail. She hadn't drawn it in years, but the weight of it returned to her in memory. Another knock. This time, a voice followed, calm and authoritative. "Sarah, it's Commander Rains. I know you're in there. We need to talk." The name hit her like a blade between the ribs. She opened the door cautiously. A man in his late 50s stood on her porch, his uniform pressed sharp, his bearing unmistakable. He wasn't alone. 2 officers lingered at the curb, their black SUV engine still idling in the misty night. "Commander," she said flatly. She hadn't spoken that word in 12 years. He inclined his head, studying her. His hair was silver now, but his eyes still carried that steel that made men listen. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," she replied. Rains allowed a small smile. Still blunt. "I'll keep this short." He glanced toward the street, then back at her. "There's a situation. A serious one. We need you." Sarah stiffened. "I told you people I'm done. 12 years done. Whatever you think I can do, you've got others for that." "Not for this," Rains said quietly. His tone carried no drama, only certainty. "You've got a skill set that no one else has. And right now, that could mean lives saved or lost." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I'm not your operator anymore. I'm a trainer, a coach. This isn't my fight." Rains's expression hardened. "You think walking away erased who you are? You think running a gym makes you ordinary? The truth is, Sarah, you never really leave the teams. The teams don't leave you." The words sliced through her. They echoed the very fear she carried, the truth she tried to bury beneath routines and quiet mornings. Hostages, he continued. American citizens. The kind of people who won't survive if we don't act. We're putting together a small unit. We need your experience. Medical, tactical, leadership. She shook her head. I buried that part of my life for a reason. I know, Rain said softly. For the first time, his voice carried something almost like compassion. But the world doesn't care about your reasons. The world is what it is. And sometimes it comes knocking. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Sarah's mind spun. She remembered the heat of desert nights, the weight of her rifle, the shouts of men who trusted her with their lives. She remembered the blood on her hands, the funerals that followed. She had left to escape that endless cycle. But she also remembered the faces of civilians they had saved. Children pulled from basements. Prisoners freed from cages. The look in their eyes when the nightmare ended. That was the hook. Rains knew it. What makes you think I'd say yes? She asked finally. Rain studied her with the patience of a man who had been in this game too long. Because I know you. You can lie to yourself, Sarah, but not to me. You've tried to be done. You've tried to bury it. But when lives are on the line, you don't walk away. You never have. The silence stretched between them, heavy as stone. Sarah's fists clenched at her sides. She hated him for being right. Hated that the fire still flickered inside her, even after 12 years. Think about it, Rain said at last. He pulled a small card from his pocket and placed it on the table inside her doorway. No name, no number, just a time and a location. If you're in, meet me there tomorrow night. If you're not, he glanced at her, his voice turning hard again. Then I'll assume the Sarah I knew is gone. He turned and walked down the steps, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. The SUV doors opened, and within seconds, the vehicle disappeared into the night, swallowed by fog. Sarah shut the door, but didn't move. The card lay on the table like a challenge. She stared at it, every muscle in her body tense. She wanted to throw it in the trash, to burn it like she had the note. She wanted to prove she was done. But she didn't move. Her hands trembled, betraying her. All night, she sat in her chair, the card lit by the lamp. Memories crashed against her like waves of missions gone wrong, of men she couldn't save, of the vow she had made never to return. But beneath it all, another voice whispered, sharp and undeniable, if not you, then who? By dawn, her decision wasn't clear. But the fact she hadn't destroyed the card spoke louder than words. The next day, she went through her routine as if nothing had changed. She trained the kids, corrected stances, pushed adults past their limits. Outwardly, she was the same Coach Sarah. Inwardly, she was unraveling. Every time she touched a rope, every time she corrected a grip, her body remembered. The seal in her stirred, restless. And by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, she already knew where she'd be that night. She wasn't ready. She wasn't willing. But she also wasn't capable of turning her back. Not when she could make a difference. At 2,100 hours, Sarah pulled on a dark jacket, slipped the card into her pocket, and left her quiet house behind. She locked the door with deliberate care, as if she knew she might not walk back through it the same. The Navy had called her back, and for the first time in 12 years, she was answering. The training compound looked the same as it had 12 years ago, gray concrete walls, floodlights stabbing through the night, the faint smell of salt and gun oil carried on the breeze. Sarah stood at the gate, hands shoved into her jacket pockets, watching recruits jog past in formation. Their chants echoed into the dark, rhythmic and raw, like the heartbeat of a world she thought she'd buried. She had promised herself she would never return here. And yet, here she was. Commander Rains was waiting for her just inside. "Didn't think you'd show?" he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp with approval. "I almost didn't," she muttered. He gave a thin smile. "But you did. That's what counts." The compound was buzzing with energy. Young operators, some barely into their 20s, moved through drills with the kind of intensity Sarah remembered from her own days. They were lean, sharp, and hungry. She felt their eyes on her as she walked past, some curious, some skeptical. Whispers followed. "That's her? Looks too old. Thought she retired ages ago." Sarah ignored them, though each word stung like grit under skin. She wasn't the wide-eyed recruit anymore. She was a ghost come back to life, and they didn't know what to make of her. Rains led her to a group of instructors gathered near the obstacle course. "She'll be joining the unit," he announced. "Treat her like any other candidate." The instructors raised brows but said nothing. One, a broad-shouldered lieutenant with a cocky grin, stepped forward. "With respect, sir, she's been out 12 years. That's a lifetime in our world." His eyes flicked to Sarah. "No offense, my AM, but this isn't a place for nostalgia." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Good thing I didn't come here for nostalgia." The lieutenant smirked, but there was an edge of challenge in his stare. Training began at dawn. The recruits were relentless, and the instructors pushed them even harder. Sarah was thrown into the grind without ceremony. Rope climbs, wall scales, mud crawls, and endless sprints under the rising sun. Her body screamed in protest. She wasn't 20 anymore, and 12 years of civilian life had softened edges she once honed to steel. Sweat poured down her back, muscles trembled, lungs burned. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong here anymore. But then the old rhythm kicked in. The instincts she thought she had lost came roaring back, like a fire reignited. Every rope climb became smoother, every sprint steadier, every push-up deeper. By the second day, her body remembered. By the third, her mind was locked in. She wasn't keeping up anymore, she was leading. The lieutenant who had mocked her made sure to stay close, watching her every move, waiting for her to fail. During a brutal endurance run, he jogged at her side, his smirk curling with each mile. "You're slowing," he taunted. "You can quit." No shame in it. Sarah didn't look at him. "You first." By the 12th mile, his smirk had vanished, his breath ragged. Sarah kept going, her pace unbroken. When they crossed the finish line, she didn't gloat. She just walked past him, calm and steady. That silence cut deeper than any words could. The true test came on the obstacle course. A towering wall stood at the end, the kind designed to break spirits. One by one, recruits tried and failed, slipping down with curses and bruises. The lieutenant climbed, struggled, and barely made it over, landing with a thud. When Sarah's turn came, whispers rose. Some expected her to quit. Others wanted to see her humiliated. She studied the wall for a single breath, then sprinted forward. Her hands caught the edge, her body moved with practiced precision, and within seconds she scaled it with a fluid grace that silenced the entire field. 18 seconds. When she dropped to the ground on the other side, she looked up to see every recruit staring. The lieutenant's grin was gone, replaced by a grudging respect he couldn't hide. Days turned into weeks. The more they tested her, the more Sarah proved she wasn't a relic. She was sharper, steadier, and more dangerous than many of them. She didn't outmuscle the younger recruits, but she outhought them, outlasted them, and outwilled them. She never bragged, never showed off. When others collapsed, she helped them up. When a recruit's hands bled from the ropes, she wrapped them without hesitation. Leadership wasn't about proving strength. It was about carrying others through the fire. Even the lieutenant, once her loudest critic, began watching her with something closer to admiration. But Sarah knew the hardest part wasn't physical. It was mental. Every night, she sat on her bunk, staring at the blank ceiling, fighting the ghosts that training stirred back to life. She saw faces again, teammates lost, missions that went wrong. The weight of memory pressed down, reminding her of why she had walked away in the first place. Yet each morning, she rose before the others, laced her boots, and stepped back into the grind. The choice to return wasn't easy. It was tearing open scars she had spent 12 years stitching shut. But with each obstacle, each drill, each test, she realized something. She wasn't here for herself. She was here because lives depended on it. On the final day of evaluation, Rains stood before the assembled recruits. "This mission isn't for the faint of heart," he told them. "We need the best, the ones who won't break under fire." His gaze swept the group, then landed on Sarah. She's proven herself. She's earned her place. There were no objections, not even from the lieutenant. As the group dispersed, the younger SEAL approached her. His smirk was gone, replaced with a quiet respect. "Didn't think you had it," he admitted. "Guess I was wrong." Sarah shrugged lightly. "Happens." He gave a short laugh. "Glad you're on our side." That night, Sarah sat alone on the training field, the cool wind tugging at her hair. For the first time in years, she felt the fire burning steady in her chest, not the fire of restlessness, but of purpose. She had walked away from this world once, convinced she was done. But now, facing the horizon, she knew the truth. She hadn't come back because she missed it. She had come back because when the Navy called, it wasn't just about her. It was about the people who needed saving, the teammates who needed someone they could trust. And Sarah Kepner, once hidden, now reborn, was ready. The roar of the transport plane was deafening, but inside the cabin, silence reigned. Each operator sat strapped in, eyes focused, rifles cradled tight against their chests. They were flying into the kind of mission whispered about in corridors, but never printed in reports. Sarah sat among them, her face calm, but her pulse steady as a drumbeat. 12 years away hadn't dulled her senses, it had sharpened them. She could feel the shift in the air, that razor tension that only came before combat. Around her, the younger SEALs sneaked glances. Some still questioned her. Others waited to see if the stories they'd heard were true. She didn't bother reassuring them. The battlefield would speak for her. Commander Rains's voice crackled through the comms. "Target compound is located deep inside hostile territory. Hostages confirmed 5 Americans, high-value civilians. Intel says the site is heavily guarded. No second chances. We get in, we get out." The Lieutenant Cole, the one who had once doubted her, looked across the cabin at Sarah. His eyes no longer held scorn, only a silent acknowledgement. "We'll need you out there." Sarah gave a curt nod. The drop zone came fast. One by one, the SEALs launched into the night sky, parachutes cutting black silhouettes against the moon. The air was sharp and cold, biting at exposed skin. Sarah's body moved with practiced ease, muscles remembering every motion as if no time had passed. Her chute deployed clean. She landed with barely a sound, rolling into the sand. Within minutes, the team assembled, a dozen shadows blending into the terrain. The desert stretched silent around them, but danger was never far in places like this. "Move out," Rains whispered. They did. The compound appeared on the horizon, a squat fortress of concrete walls and corrugated steel, ringed with guards. Spotlights swept across the yard, but the team had planned every step, every angle. Sarah moved with the point element, her rifle raised, eyes scanning constantly. Every creak, every shift of wind set her instincts on edge. She wasn't a rookie anymore. She was the one the rookies looked to. At the outer wall, she signaled halt. A guard smoked near the gate, unaware of the shadows stalking him. Sarah's hand lifted in a quick motion 3 fingers, then 2, then 1. On 0, the team struck. A silenced shot dropped the guard before he even exhaled his last drag. They were inside. The team split, half sweeping toward the barracks, half toward the main building where Intel placed the hostages. Sarah led the latter group. Cole at her flank. They breached the door with controlled violence, flashbangs exploding in a thunderous burst. Shouts erupted inside. Shadows scrambled. Sarah moved low and fast, rifle barking in short, controlled bursts. One hostile fell, then another. Cole covered her left. Clear left. Right clear. Sarah called, her voice steady despite the chaos. Room by room, they advanced, until muffled cries led them to a locked door in the basement. Sarah pressed her ear to the wood. Voices panicked, American. Hostages, she breathed. Cole placed the charge. The explosion rattled the hall, the door splintering inward. Sarah was the first inside, rifle sweeping, finger tight on the trigger. No enemies, just 5 terrified civilians, blindfolded and bound. "We're here to get you home," she said firmly, kneeling to cut the ties. Her voice, calm and commanding, broke through their fear. But rescue was never that simple. Movement. A SEAL shouted from the hall. A wave of gunfire erupted, rattling the walls. Sarah shoved the hostages to cover, shielding them with her own body. Contact rear. Cole barked. The compound had been alerted. More guards poured in, their rifles unleashing a storm of bullets. The narrow halls turned into a furnace of fire and smoke. Sarah fought with precision, each shot measured, controlled. She wasn't the fastest trigger in the team, but she was the calmest under pressure. Her eyes tracked every movement, every shadow, calculating angles in real time. She was a medic, a sniper, and a leader all in one. "Cole, get them out," she shouted, motioning to the hostages. "What about you?" "I'll cover." For minutes that stretched like hours, Sarah held the line. Bullets sparked against concrete, dust choking the air, bodies dropping in waves. Her rifle clicked empty. She drew her pistol, firing with deadly accuracy. When that ran dry, she reloaded without hesitation, hands steady despite the chaos. By the time Cole returned, the hall was littered with silence. He stared at her, breathing hard. "You held them off alone?" Sarah holstered her pistol. "Wouldn't be the first time." The exfil was chaos. The enemy regrouped, chasing them across the compound. Helicopter rotors thundered overhead, kicking up clouds of sand as the team dragged hostages aboard. Sarah was the last one in, firing bursts into the dark until the bird lifted free. As the ground fell away, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The hostages huddled close, clutching each other, whispering prayers. Around her, the SEALs exchanged glances not of doubt anymore, but of awe. Cole shook his head, grinning despite the exhaustion. "Guess the stories didn't do you justice." Sarah didn't answer. She just stared out the window at the shrinking desert, her reflection caught in the glass. The mission was a success, but her mind already churned. This wasn't just a one-time call. Missions like this didn't end, they multiplied. And she knew, with a weight heavy in her chest, that she was back in this world for good. Later, back at the compound, Rains found her alone on the tarmac, helmet dangling from one hand. "You saved them," he said simply. Sarah shrugged. "It's what we do." Rains studied her quietly. "I knew you'd come back. Not because you wanted to, but because you had to." She didn't reply. She only looked up at the stars, distant and cold, and felt the truth settle deep inside her. The sealed past she had hidden for 12 years was no longer past. It was present, and it was calling louder than ever. The compound was quiet at night. Training fields lay empty, obstacle courses silhouetted under pale moonlight. The roar of helicopters had faded, leaving only the sound of the ocean beyond the wire. Sarah sat alone on a bench near the barracks, her elbows on her knees, her hands clasped tight. She had been back for weeks now, and the adrenaline of the mission had faded. The hostages were safe, the debrief was complete, and the team had been praised in glowing terms. To the outside world, it was a victory. But inside Sarah's chest, a different battle raged. Sleep came in fragments, each one shattered by ghosts. She woke drenched in sweat, the images replaying gunfire in the narrow halls, the terrified eyes of the hostages, the lifeless bodies of enemies left behind. And always, beneath those memories, the faces of teammates from her first life, the ones who hadn't made it back. The Navy had given her 12 years of silence. Now, it had given her noise again. And noise was harder to live with. During the day, she trained with the younger SEALs, leading drills, sharpening edges. Outwardly, she was strong, steady, a leader they could rely on. Inwardly, the weight pressed harder each day. Cole noticed. He found her one evening in the shooting range, where she fired round after round into a target, long after everyone else had gone. "You're burning holes through that paper," he said quietly, leaning against the wall. Sarah ejected the magazine, set the rifle down, and didn't answer. Cole stepped closer. "You carried us out there. Hell, you carried me. But since we got back, you've been somewhere else." Her jaw tightened. "You don't get it. Then explain." She turned to him, her eyes hard. "You all still think this is about proving myself. It's not. I proved it already, more times than I can count. What you don't see is the cost. Every time you go out, you leave pieces of yourself behind. And eventually, there's nothing left but ghosts." Cole didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "So why did you come back?" The question hit her like a punch. She didn't answer right away. Finally, she whispered, "Because when people need saving, I can't walk away, even if it destroys me." Raines called her into his office the next day. The walls were lined with maps, photos, and mission logs, the air heavy with the smell of old coffee and ink. "You've done well," he said simply. "Better than I expected." Sarah leaned back in the chair, her arms crossed. "And now you're going to ask me to do more." He didn't deny it. "The world doesn't stop. There's another operation forming. High risk. Bigger than the last one." Sarah let out a harsh laugh. "Of course there is." Raines studied her with the same calm patience he always had. "You could walk away. No one would stop you. You've already done more than enough. But you know I won't," she said bitterly. "Because you're not built that way," Raines replied. "You never were. You walk away, you'll hate yourself more than you hate this life." Sarah stared at him, her throat tight. He wasn't wrong. That was what made it unbearable. Outside the office, she walked the length of the compound alone. The recruits passed by, their faces young, eager, unscarred. She envied them in a strange way. They still believed strength was endless, that sacrifice didn't cut as deep as it truly did. She remembered being like that once. She remembered the first missions, the rush of belonging, the certainty that she was making a difference. That belief had carried her through hell. But belief didn't protect you from loss. It didn't stop the nightmares. That weekend, she returned briefly to her quiet home, trying to step back into the life she had left behind. The gym was still there, the same smell of chalk and sweat, the same kids laughing as they climbed ropes and jumped boxes. Parents greeted her with smiles. unaware of where she had been. She coached, she smiled, she clapped encouragement. Outwardly, nothing had changed, but she could feel it, the distance widening. She was here, but part of her was still in the compound, still in the desert, still on that transport plane. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the empty walls. 12 years she had built this life of peace. And in a matter of weeks, the Navy had pulled her back into the storm. And the worst part? She knew she wouldn't resist again. When the call came, another sealed envelope slid under her door. She didn't even hesitate this time. She didn't burn it. She didn't throw it away. She unfolded it slowly, her hands steady, and read the location and time. She exhaled a long, heavy breath. The decision had already been made. Back at the compound, she found Cole waiting near the obstacle course. He watched her with a knowing look. "You're in again," he said. Sarah gave a wry smile. "Looks like it." He hesitated, then asked, "Does it ever get easier?" She shook her head. "No, but you get better at carrying it." That night, lying on her bunk, Sarah stared at the ceiling again. But something was different this time. The ghosts were still there, pressing heavy, whispering in the dark. But alongside them was something steadier, a purpose, raw and undeniable. She had tried to keep her sealed past hidden for 12 years. Tried to convince herself she was done. But the truth had finally caught up with her. This was who she was. This was who she would always be. And no matter the cost, she would answer the call again. The sun had not yet risen over the desert as Sarah's team approached the target zone. The air was cold and still, a deceptive calm that promised nothing. Her rifle was slung across her back, her pack heavy with supplies, but her mind was sharper than ever. Every step was calculated, every shadow noted. This mission wasn't just another operation, it was personal. The stakes were higher, and the cost of failure loomed larger than ever before. Beside her, Cole glanced over. "You ready?" Sarah didn't respond. She never needed to. Her eyes alone told him she was prepared. 12 years of secrecy, 12 years away, had forged her into someone few understood, but who everyone now depended upon. The compound lay ahead, fortified with armed guards and surveillance, a hive of danger. Sarah led the team through a series of narrow canyons, using terrain and cover to avoid detection. Her body moved with instinctive precision, muscles recalling movements she hadn't consciously practiced in years. The SEALs behind her followed silently, trusting her judgment completely. They reached the perimeter and paused. The hostages were held inside a single-story structure, windows barred, guards stationed around it like sentinels. Sarah crouched, scanning for weak points. Her hands traced a mental map, calculating angles, lines of fire, and escape routes. "You have the lead," Rains whispered over comms. She nodded once, signaling the team forward. The breach was sudden, explosive, and precise. Flashbangs detonated with deafening clarity, throwing the guards into disarray. Sarah moved first, pistol raised, clearing corners with deadly calm. Bullets ricocheted, dust exploded in every corner, and the screams of the frightened hostages cut through the chaos. One guard lunged at a hostage. Without hesitation, Sarah intercepted, spinning, blocking, and subduing him in a single motion. Another fired from above. She rolled to cover, returned fire, and neutralized the threat. Every move was measured, every breath controlled. 12 years of hiding had not dulled her edge, it had refined it. The hostages, 5 Americans, were terrified but unharmed. Sarah knelt beside them, her voice firm yet soothing. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." She cut their restraints, guiding them toward the exit. Behind her, Cole and the other SEALs covered every angle, but it was Sarah who orchestrated the evacuation. As they reached the open yard, more guards poured in. Sarah didn't flinch. She raised her rifle, signaling the team. Bullets flew, but her team moved with synchronized precision. She covered them, clearing paths, providing suppressing fire, and ensuring no one behind her was left exposed. By the time the helicopter landed, the compound was in chaos. Smoke and dust filled the air, but the hostages were safe, the team intact. Sarah was the last to board, firing a few controlled bursts into the fading shadows to ensure the extraction remained unchallenged. Once airborne, Sarah allowed herself a brief moment to exhale. The hostages huddled close, shaken but alive. Around her, the SEALs exchanged glances, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Respect? Yes, but more than that, awe. They had watched a woman who had once disappeared into anonymity take command, execute a flawless operation, and return the Americans safely to their country. Cole leaned against the cabin wall, voice quiet. "You've still got it." Sarah didn't respond. She let the hum of the rotors fill the silence, knowing words weren't necessary. Actions had already said everything. Back at base, debriefing was methodical. Every detail, every movement scrutinized. Raines commended her performance, but even he couldn't fully articulate the quiet force she brought to the team. She had proven herself beyond physical ability. She had reminded them all that experience, wisdom, and resolve could surpass youth and raw strength. After the debrief, Sarah stepped outside. The desert air was crisp, the first rays of sunlight burning away the night's shadows. She looked at the horizon, at the vast emptiness stretching endlessly before her. 12 years of hiding had ended tonight. Her past was no longer buried, her skills no longer hidden. She had returned, faced the storm, and emerged as both mentor and warrior. But the victory came with a cost. As she walked back to her quarters, Sarah's mind wandered to the life she had built outside the SEAL world, the quiet mornings on the coast, the children she trained, the small routines that gave her peace. She knew she couldn't fully reconcile both worlds. Being a SEAL wasn't a job anymore. It was a calling, one that demanded every ounce of her strength, every fraction of her heart. Still, she smiled faintly, thinking of the students she had left behind for a few weeks. They would grow stronger, and she had taught them well. Perhaps one day, they'd understand that courage didn't always come from weapons or missions. It came from choosing to act when it mattered most. Later that evening, she sat alone on the barracks roof, staring at the stars. 12 years ago, she had disappeared, choosing obscurity over the chaos of war. 12 years later, she had returned, answering a call she could never ignore. And in that return, she had reclaimed something she didn't realize she had missed, the certainty that she mattered, that her presence could tip the scales between life and death. A soft breeze stirred her hair, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt the weight in her chest lift slightly. She had faced ghosts, faced fear, faced herself, and had not flinched. The Navy would call again. Missions would continue. Danger would never truly vanish. But neither would she. Sarah Kepner, the woman who had hidden her SEAL past for 12 years, had returned not to reclaim glory or fame, but to embrace who she truly was, a warrior, a protector, a leader. Her legacy wasn't in medals or recognition. It was in every life she saved, every operator she guided, every young recruit who learned the meaning of courage under her watchful eye. She would always be both the shadow and the light, the hidden SEAL now revealed. And in the silence of the desert night, she allowed herself one quiet thought: I am home wherever the mission takes me.